Here we are again. We're walking with Jesus through the Gospel of Mark. And today we're talking about this passage that we read about in Mark 7, verses 14 through 23. Interesting passage, because here we get back to some direct teaching from the mind and the mouth of Jesus himself. It's not a miracle. He's setting forth some direct teaching that really affects people's lives. Starts out by saying that Jesus again called the crowd to him. You can almost kind of see this, can't you? I get the picture. He was saying, "Come here, everybody. I have something I need to tell you." And so he called the crowd to him, and then he said this: "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There's nothing outside the man which can defile him if it goes into him, but the things which proceed out of the man are what defile the man." Okay, what did he mean by that? Well, it's interesting here that this is identified as a parable. It doesn't fit into the normal pattern that we see of a parable, because usually we see some kind of an illustration story that leads us to a spiritual conclusion here. But here's just a direct teaching that is also called a parable. But he later on, as he evidently often did, he gave a direct explanation to his disciples so that they would be very clear about what he was teaching, and so that later on they could pass this on as well. And he was saying to them that it's not food that defiles a man. Whoa, wait a minute. What about those laws? What about those foods that they couldn't eat under the law of Moses? They had been obedient to those laws for hundreds of years. Their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and on back were obedient to these dietary laws that had been set forth in the law, these dietary restrictions set forth that they could not violate as faithful Jews. Now we can go back and actually look very closely at what those foods were. But generally, it was categorized as clean and unclean animals. In that would be pork. A faithful Jew cannot eat pork. A faithful Jew cannot eat shellfish. And there's certain other kinds of fish. There's some kind of fish they can eat, and sometimes they can't. Some they can't eat. For instance, they couldn't eat a catfish. I find that a little sad. But they couldn't eat a catfish, okay? And why were those laws there? Well, to be very honest, we have to speculate. Since there is no explanation given within Scripture, we can only guess as to why God included those dietary restrictions. I think I've been taught most of my life that it was to avoid trichinosis, but that's a speculation. We really don't know for sure. But the truth is, bottom line here is, that the Jews had been given some dietary restrictions, and faithful Jews had kept that for centuries. Even today, those Jews that are still observant of their law are still against eating anything that is not kosher. Some of you may be familiar with a man by the name of Ben Shapiro. He does a conservative podcast that it's almost, I think it's a daily thing, I'm not sure, but he is a strict observant Jew, and he's very proud of that, as a matter of fact. But I heard him say one time that if he was given the option of either dying or eating a ham sandwich, he would have to choose to die. Well, we may not agree with that. We may not even understand that. But we should respect that level of dedication to what he believes. Even the Apostle Paul later on talked about eating food that violated the conscience of the people that were around them. And there was a danger in doing that. So if we happen to go to lunch with Ben Shapiro, we shouldn't order a ham sandwich. And yet somebody might say, well, I'll eat anything I want to. If you have that attitude, then you are valuing your opinion and your options more than the soul of the person that you are communicating with. Placing a division between us and other people based on food, how petty is that? How silly is that? And Paul himself pointed that out. But back to the lesson here, Jesus said it's okay to eat anything. And that was really the bottom line. This would have been a hard lesson for those faithful Jews. But the point is that obedience to God is not about food. It's about what really contaminates the soul of each man and woman. And food does not contaminate. Food goes into the stomach. What contaminates it is what comes out of the heart. This is exactly what Jesus was teaching. Read that. He gives a list of these things that contaminate. And he starts with evil thoughts, which actually is kind of a broad statement of including a lot of things. But then he mentions sexual sins, taking what doesn't belong to you, stealing. He talks about murders, killing another person, and adultery. Those things we obviously see as very sinful. But then he also includes coveting and this broad word of wickedness. But then he says, as well as, and he includes deceit and sensuality, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. You see, what he was saying here was contrary to the way that we often think. We kind of categorize sins and we make some worse than another. But in this context, Jesus was actually saying that your pride is just as much of a violation of the righteousness of God as is murder. He does not want your life to be contaminated by these sinful things. And it isn't religious rules that make a person what they're supposed to be. It's a pure heart and a transformed life. It's not just eating like a Jew, but living like Jesus. It's not obedience to this checklist of laws, but obedience to a holy and dedicated life as a true disciple. You know, I think we could learn a lot by looking at what we think is important in our life. What is showing in our life that shows that we are truly followers of Jesus Christ? Is it a list of religious rules? Here's a test. Does your obedience make you look religious, or does it make you look like Jesus? Have a great day. Bye.
They resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Words of life, words of hope.